Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa and Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Lieutenant Colonel retired Shaye Molendyke, a 28-year Air Force veteran. She is the creator and director of Yoga Fit for Warriors and Yoga Fit for Warrior Kids. These trauma-informed yoga programs are focused on helping and empowering anyone struggling with PTSD or unresolved physical and emotional trauma. They are especially designed for yoga teachers, mental health workers, educators, veterans, their families, first responders, and those who help and love them. Shaye is also a yoga therapist through the International Association of Yoga Therapies, the IAYT, and specializes in working with groups and individuals to help process unresolved traumas, to include long-held childhood traumas. She earned her master's in counseling from the University of Maryland in 2003 while she was in the military, and spent a year working directly with veterans returning from the Iraq War and the inpatient psychiatric ward at Landstuhl base, Germany. Shaye, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Diane. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and a joy.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service and your continued service. I feel like, retired is kind of these titles that don't actually ever happen.
No, it feels weird. It does. And I think that those, just like yourself, who go into professions of service, you're a servant. No matter where you go, you want to be a servant, you want to be of service to others. And so, it's just a different kind of hat you wear, but I don't like saying retired, just feels weird. And it makes me feel kind of old. So.
I hear you. I mean, I think there's so many similarities between the military and police department and how we run things, the type of skills and trainings that we get. And I think one of the biggest things is our relationship to fear. And I think that how that shows up for people can be very different if you're in the military versus in the civilians. And there's also a lot of triggers that come with that in terms of anxiety. And so I'd love for you to share how your kind of orientation to fear was either shaped within the military, and how you actually use it to serve your clients today.
Yes. That's not something I thought about when I joined the military, and I joined through ROTC in college. And so I went through, the ROTC program. I was on scholarship, and, I always knew I wanted to join the military. My dad was a Marine, but at no point did I ever really think, oh, well, I'm going to have to face fear, during my military duty. I'm going to have to potentially face dangerous things. And am I able to do it? I mean, I think I kind of had that view, like a lot of young people, like I'm immortal and I can do anything. But it was my first, I remember very distinctly when I felt challenged in my fear, when I realized I haven't really processed what I've decided to do, what I decided to join in the military. And of course, I was in the Air Force. I was not a Marine or in the Army or in the police force like you. It's a different service, but I did get deployed over to Korea. And of course, we are actually, many people don't realize they're still at war technically in Korea. And we have the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. And I was very close to the base I was assigned to. And I remember getting off the bus after a very long 2 days of travel to get there. And the wing commander, the commander of the base, I remember we got off the bus and he marched us in to the officers club at the time. And it was, I felt like I was back in boot camp, and I had been in the military for about 5 years by then. I mean, I'd been to a couple of bases. I thought I knew what I was doing. I was, pretty tough, but I get in there and he, gets us all in there. We're all tired, exhausted. I just wanted to go to sleep, and he immediately said, you need to get your minds right. And if you're not sleeping with a knife under your pillow, you haven't paid attention to where you just landed and what's going on here. And I went, what is he talking about?
What did I sign up for?
Yeah, I did. I hate to say it, I kind of feel like Goldie Hawn and,
Private Benjamin.
Yeah, it's a Private Benjamin. Like, I'm sorry, I thought boot camp was a shoe sale. I kind of had that moment of, wow, this is the first time that I'm, sort of being challenged here, and I don't have my head in the game. I wasn't. And at that moment, I did. I really did. I said, I went, okay, I'm in a war zone potentially. There's things that happen here all the time to people, and I need to get my head in the game. So that was, I hate to say 5 years after I joined the military, but that's where I, was face to face with, wow, I've signed up to give my life for my country potentially. I have to now put my, my mouth where my words are, put my, the money where your words are. And I did it. I was like, all right, I'm going to really focus on being the best airman here that I can. I was in charge of logistics on the base. And if we went to war, I had to run the whole plan for the base. I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back, but that was an overwhelming thing for me. And I sat down, literally took out, we had books of plans at the time, took out books and I memorized it. I was like, okay, this is what the plan is. This is what we're supposed to do. Cause it was really literally kind of on me. And I remember reading, oh, we're going to use the commissary as a morgue. In other words, like rethink how you think about this whole thing and like where you go buy your food. We're going to use the freezers to put dead bodies. I know I hate to be so, kind of morbid, but that's the brute reality of it. It just faces you in the face. You don't get to not have fear. You get to acknowledge you're fearful and then do whatever you have to do anyway.
Right.
And so that's what I just did over and over again. Okay, this is scary and I'm doing it anyway. Right. This is potentially very, very scary and I'm doing it anyway. So I don't know. That's my memory of like really feeling scared and going, okay, but I signed up for it. So I'm doing it.
I think there's a wake up point that happens for everyone who has put themselves in a situation that they maybe don't realize the peril that's in it or the details. And I think that's also where training tends to kick in too. Like, when you have a plan and you know what you're doing, then, you move towards that. But I can remember, as a police officer, the first time being shot at. And I remember thinking like, who's shooting at me? Like, what are you serious? Is this seriously happening right now? Like, if you hear the whiz of a bullet go past your ear, that's close. Like, those are decisions and things that you have to move in the moment. And not only do you need to kind of register that fear, like, in your body and your mind, but then you have to be able to set it aside. The compartmentalization comes into play, and you have to be able to run towards those kind of things. So there's a lot of multiple things that go on when you're faced with those things, and different things that can trigger trauma, that can have different things that can happen in and around that. And for you, I mean, when I first was on the police department, there weren't that many women in general in it. And I was actually the only woman on my squad for many years. And so that brings a lot of things, to it, as well as how you show up in the job. You've talked about one of the disempowering things that you experienced was being a woman in the military, and that there were some challenging things around that. How is it that you feel like you experienced it different as a woman, and how did you take some of those challenges head on?
Yeah, that again, I was in the Air Force, so a little different than some of the other services. And so when I first joined, it was actually in 1992 after I came out of college, and I went to Luke Air Force Base. There was the first female fighter pilot was arriving at the base. That's where we're at. We weren't even able to be fighter pilots when I joined. Like, you couldn't go to combat. Women weren't allowed in combat. And we're still fighting some of those battles, right? And so I was really inspired by that, and by, what I saw her and how strong she was, and how she approached, coming into a completely male domain. And how she held her head high. She was held to a higher standard. And that's what I immediately did. I was like, oh, good enough isn't good enough. You have to be better than that. I have to be one step ahead. I have to anticipate that they're going to look at me as a potentially weak link, and I'm not going to be that weak link. So I was running 5 miles a day. I was hitting the gym. I was, studying everything I could on, knew all the rules, the procedures, what I needed to know for my job, and always trying to be, just that one step better. So, you didn't just get to be middle. At least I didn't feel like I had that luxury. I had to be better so I could be, without reprimand. Like I could be, blameless in any given situation. That's not fair, but that's the reality. And, it is what it is. It's gotten a lot better, of course. And then also you learn to, and you don't realize until hindsight, at least I look back, ingratiate yourself with the men. And again, I don't think they were ill-intentioned. Most of them are still friends, dear friends. And I got along with them, but, telling the dirty jokes, I cussed a lot. I'll be honest. I wanted to fit in, and that's what you did. I went to the bar and played, we played crud every night. I did whatever I had to do to ingratiate myself with this group. So could be kind of one of the guys, even though I knew I never would be fully, but always trying to make that. So trying to be something in some ways that I wasn't, again, in hindsight, right? I don't know that I did that intentionally. It was unintentional, just because you felt like you had to. But now I think if I went in today, I would hope that young women going in today feel like they don't have to necessarily do that, right? Like that you don't feel pressured to perform in a certain way, like a monkey in the circus, just to prove that, hey, I can get along with you guys. I'm one of the guys too, kind of thing. Yeah. Even though it was fun and I had a great time, and a lot of them are very protective. And so I felt most of the time, not all the time, fairly protected by my wingman. There was band of brothers, band of sisters, but it was me always making the effort, if that makes any sense. Like it wasn't reciprocated.
Yeah, absolutely.
They didn't have to.
Yes, right. Well, I think that's part of it as well, because I can remember some of that, especially when I worked undercover, because you're taking on a whole different personality in and of itself. And especially for me, I was undercover as a prostitute hunting a serial killer. So you can imagine the language that had to change in that. And I can remember even my dad going like, I paid for that mouth to go to college. Like, you have to take on certain roles, and there's certain ways of being in order to do the job, right? To do the aspects that you need to do. So really getting clear on, where do I end and my roles, come into play, and how I'm making decisions. Like there's so many different things in that. And so you take all of that with you, right? All of your experience, all the things that you see that allows you to be a strong person, to get really clear on what your convictions are and where you decide to put your energy and your focus. So for you, how is it that trauma and PTSD and you having a focus of serving in that area, was there a personal experience that came into play? Was there, working with fellow officers? Like what was kind of the road that led you there?
The story that that always comes to mind is when I was in the military. This is after some time. I was getting my master's in counseling. So that's when I was over in Germany, and I did that internship at Landstuhl on the psych ward after I got my master's in counseling. So, I'd already been in the military for 10 years. I had started yoga a couple of years before that, actually 5 years before that. So I've been doing yoga a lot. I wasn't a teacher yet. I was just practicing it. And then when I went to work on the psych ward in 2003, then we were starting to see the first airbags of mostly young men, honestly, from age 19 to 24, coming back from combat with PTSD and having maybe suicidal behaviors, or they would really be not in a great place, and they would have to be airbagged, and we would get them on the psych ward. So I was had to talk to them. And I was, I'm a talker. I like to talk. So that's fine. I could do that. Diagnose. Oh, okay. I can do that pretty easy. But then I sat with one young man, and he stands out. I can still see him in my mind. And I was talking, because that's what you do as a talk therapist. And he just looked at me and he said, "Ma'am, you can talk to me all day." He goes, "But when I leave here, I'm still going to kill myself." And I was shocked. That just stopped me cold. I got my hair on the back of my neck, and I was like, "I'm giving you everything I have. I've spent 4 years training. I feel like I'm a good counselor, therapist," and I could not reach him. And there was no worse feel. I felt, talk about helpless. That is scary. That's the most scared I've ever been. And I was so also frustrated and demoralized. Like, I'm not helping him. Obviously, I'm not good at this. And so that's where I got the idea when I knew, I was like, there's something missing here in this, in how we're treating these people. Something is not working. It just is not landing. And I knew separately, I thought I knew yoga could help everybody in there. I was like, oh my gosh, yoga has helped me. It's tremendous. And I knew it made me feel better, but I didn't really understand the mechanisms. So I spent, after that year, and again, I don't know what happened to that young man. I have no idea when he left, what happened. I felt so demoralized when I left. I said, I'm not going to become a counselor. I'm not good at it. I didn't really feel like I helped anybody on that ward for the year, even though I know that's probably false thinking. Right. And then fast forward, we came back to the States. I joined the reserves, transitioned from active duty, and I started teaching yoga. And then I became a trainer for Yoga Fit. So many years later, and then I got my hands on this book, and I know people might be able to see this. It's called In an Unspoken Voice by Dr. Peter Levine. And that book, when it got handed to me and I read it, I was like, the lights came on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I needed this information in the psych ward. What he talks about, polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges, how trauma is held in the body, he and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, another great big name in the world of somatic psychology, how they said, talk therapy is not effective, does not work well for people with PTSD and body-based traumas. And I was like, thank you. I was, it was a relief.
Where have you been?
Yeah. And then I felt so sad that I didn't know that 10 years ago. And I was like, yoga does help. And now I know why, and I can articulate why. I can talk about polyvagal theory. We can talk about the nervous system. I have all the tools now that say, oh, this is why yoga is effective. And then of course that's what born the Yoga Fit for Warriors program, Trauma Informed Yoga. And again, hindsight, always 2020, parts of me, I still look back and say, oh man, I wish I could take what I know now and go back and really feel like I can help them and make more of a difference. But that's what drives me every single day. That young man, truly that young man, and going, okay, never again, not one more person is going to suffer unnecessarily with unresolved trauma. We know now better than ever. If you're going to get PTSD, if you're going to have trauma, today's the day to get it. You don't have to suffer. You don't. Yeah. And I think that's such a relief for people when they get this information and when they work with somebody who is so body-based. So thank you for obviously getting me all worked up and like I
yes,
get
absolutely
excited about this.
Well, and there's always a catalyst, right? There's always that one young man or that one person that, when you get stumped and you don't feel like you have the tools, good for you for, finding a way above, around, underneath to get to it and have those tools come to you so that you now have those. And so I'm sure that the big question that begs to answer that people are wondering is, so how is yoga effective with body-based trauma?
Right. And so that's, the whole reason why yoga is effective in general. It doesn't kind of separate it. Yoga, is basically about lots of things. But one of the big things is you come to yoga to get rid of things, not attain something. So it's a delayering, it's a discovery process. So basically how yoga works is, I would say, not all yoga, and I want to be very clear about that. Trauma-informed yoga, trauma-based yoga does work very well because we set the conditions for that sort of exploration to happen in a safe way. And so basically trauma and stress, when they get stored in the body becomes an unsafe place to exist for people. So they do a lot of that manifests like a lot of different things. It can be disassociative kinds of feelings or events, right? Checking out. It can look like, quite frankly, ADHD in a lot of people. There's a lot of ways that it manifests. But in general, the common denominator for all trauma is a disassociation, an alienation from the body as a safe place. And yoga doesn't demand, at least trauma-informed yoga doesn't demand, go back into your body right away. What we do is we set the conditions for you to come back into the body, right? To recalibrate and reset the nervous system. Yes, predominantly through breath practices, but there's other practices. Somatic experiencing practices, literally sort of like using our hands, like I'm doing now, like kind of, feeling into the container of ourself. There's some other things. Hands to the belly. The belly is where kind of the first impact of trauma is held. So along the psoas muscle on either side of the spine. And so we start to reframe our thinking about ourselves from like these robots, mechanical beings, for me to more like a caterpillar. And so, if we, experience a threat, any kind of threat, you think if you poke a caterpillar, what does it do? It curls into a little ball. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what we do. We do that. And we do it in a very rigid way because we're going to protect vital organs. This is going to happen unconsciously. Your frontal lobe's going to check out, your reptilian brain's going to take over. And your psoas is an intelligent muscle. I wouldn't even call it a muscle. It's biointelligent emotional material. And it does like that caterpillar. It pulls everything in, protects your vital organs, pulls your hip flexors in short and tight, pulls your arms in, makes you active at fight, flight, or freeze, whatever you have to do to protect yourself. And again, you may not even have a choice about it. So then yoga says, all right, let's go back. We're going to go back there. We're not going to go through here. I'm not going to try to talk your way into feeling better or to feeling. Let's go into where it's held and explore almost like a deep sea diver, kind of go in and then come back up. And so titrate, and that's one of Dr. Levine's, ideas is we want to titrate into that experience in the body. Where is it held? And then come back out. So we use consciousness, awareness, mindfulness practices, breath practices, grounding. We use rhythm, right, to reclaim the nervous system. So it's been, dysregulated. We're in a state of stress and dis-ease. And so you can see it because all the rhythms of the body after a traumatic event, or if you have PTSD, they all get disorganized, right? Your biological clock's totally off everywhere. Your digestive rhythms are jacked up, your cardiovascular rhythms, your cranial rhythms, your circadian rhythms, your hormonal. And so yoga helps to basically recalibrate and reset all those different biological rhythms simply by breathing and moving. So more of what we call vinyasa or a flow practice is actually very ideal for somebody with trauma. It naturally helps to reset their nervous system. So some of the practices are very simple. I would say the science behind it now is more complicated. I shouldn't say complicated. You can understand it, but there's deep science that shows how powerful these simple practices are. Grounding, breathing, feeling into the belly. Where is the rigidity? Releasing the psoas. We have psoas shake, releasing literally what's called that high allostatic load. Like animals in the wild after a traumatic event, they'll shake it off afterwards. We're told, oh, don't be out of control. Don't shake, don't cry, right? And we're like, no, shake it off. This is what we need to do. Okay. So that I know that was a lot of stuff. There's just a lot there, but we know better now also because we have technology that proves this. Things like heart rate variability monitors. You have them on your new Apple Watches. I don't wear Apple Watch, but if I did, it'd be right there. And so we hook people up. This is your HRV, basically the beats between your heartbeat. And when you have a resilient nervous system that's been reset, your HRV is high. When it's not, and you have PTSD, it's low. And you have less ability to basically self-regulate. And that's another thing yoga teaches you, to notice when am I getting dysregulated? And then how can I move myself into a place of better regulation, better focus, better able to see choices to stay calm in the face of future threat as well. So that's why I'm like big on, let's train our police, let's train our fire, which they do, and our military, how to stay calm and strong, right? In stressful situations. That's how you're going to be successful building that resilience.
Yeah. So important, having just the awareness around that. And I think sometimes when people hear some of the words, they either there can be a tendency to blow it off or feel like it's too simplistic, because I think sometimes because we've heard people say, oh, take a deep breath, right? And, if you start looking at how the breath works in the body, how the body moves, right? There's a whole language that we communicate with each other. And if there's any part of us that is shut down, particularly like the psoas, most people have tight psoas, right? They've got some sort of, lack of movement that has happened. And I don't think that they always look at how could this be tied into, some sort of traumatic experience at any point in their life, or what kind of things can actually trigger that. You and I talked a little bit offline about how free will comes into play. What would you
Mm.
say free will is, and how does that affect things?
Yeah, we have a 2-day, the flagship program for the whole 100-hour trauma-informed program that I run, Yoga Fit for Warriors. Just a 2-day workshop on PTSD, particularly deep dive into PTSD, deep dive into the psoas shake. But before we get into any of that, because that's like cool, that's my geeky, cool science stuff. I love it. I have my students read the story, a brief version of Arjuna. And Arjuna is from the Bhagavad Gita, the warrior. And there's a big story there. And for those who aren't familiar with that, who are not familiar with yoga texts or philosophies, you can see it if you've ever seen the movie Avatar. That is a really good example of Arjuna and having to go against your tribe, right? Having to make a decision, a difficult decision to turn against, which he had to do against his people. And that's a really good classical warrior, what I would call a warrior's tale there. So Arjuna has to go into battle, and he has to go against his wicked cousins and his in fact his guru, his teacher in India, which is even worse than your parents. Like, he would have to go kill them, otherwise he would lose the lands, his family's lands, and he would have to cede them, and the people on the land would suffer. So he was in a damned if you do, damned if he doesn't situation, same as the military. So he turns to Krishna, who is disguised as his charioteer, who he's chosen to go into battle with, and he asks Krishna, how do I make this decision? Is it ever okay to kill somebody? This is why I have military read this, because we don't ask them this, and we need them to make it from a place of free will. And so, that's one of the big things is first of all, the very first question in the first hour of this workshop is, do you believe in free will? And if so, what is it? Like, how would you describe it? Like, does somebody in prison have free will? How do you know you're operating from free will or not? And so, of course, I get lots of different answers, right? And ultimately, I point out lots of places and cases where people are, and especially think about babies who are born to say addicts, right? Not from their own free will. And they immediately come in with less free will. We know they're more likely, because they have a dearth of dopamine receptors, to be addicts themselves. That gets into kind of intergenerational collective trauma. But you can look at, or what if they're born into poverty, racism, how much free will is really there, right? And so it's unfair to say, oh yeah, everybody has free will, you can go do whatever you want. That's not the case. That's not true. And so eventually what we get to, and I kind of lead the witness on this, is we see free will as, or at least I present it as, a spectrum of potential. And I think it correlates in yoga to this idea of consciousness, what we would call, the big C consciousness. And so the more consciousness we have, the higher amounts of sort of consciousness, or you could call that awareness. So increased awareness, advanced awareness for me is advanced yoga, then you will always be in a state of free will. That may not look like you have free will around you, right? So, you can have all these things that you have to do in your life, but what's the free will? How would I define it? Ultimately, I get to your ability to determine your attitude in any given situation. And that has to do with self-regulation. That has to do with exploring your own patterns of rigidity or limited awareness where you haven't explored, patterns of belief that have come from society, maybe from gender, like we've kind of talked about, from the institutions you work in, that kind of place. But ultimately, it's your ability to kind of determine your attitude. And it's the main goal of yoga is free will, right? That's really the main goal. And it doesn't look like being able to do the splits or the headstand or whatever. Those tools are just tools of awareness, or they're not. And they could actually limit your free will, because I have to do this, or I've got to get this perfect, or whatever. It's like, well, what's your operating system? What's your belief that's driving your actions? So it's all about, okay, you think you're moving from free will, but you're just like a puppet with the strings being pulled for you when you haven't done this belief work. So that's why I start every workshop, belief work. So thank you for asking that question, because it's a really cool when we don't talk this kind of stuff. Like, philosophy is very important to me. And all right, the belief work is always, your beliefs are always going to be the hardest thing you will ever change. And you've hit upon one, because it makes you feel very anxious to talk about it. Right. Usually one of those, it's like, whoa, that's where you should go into the anxiety, go into the fear of that belief causes you.
This is such an important thing. This is one of the reasons, we have these kind of discussions, right? Is that it's when we talk about it and we question things that we've maybe assumed before, or where does that actually come from, and how is it that we're actually making decisions? There's so many different layers to that, and especially when you add trauma onto it, and we can really start looking at, we can have a lot more control of that now, and beyond just the conversation about how we carry ourselves and what we do in our breath and how we move ourselves. And I love the part when you talk about determining what your attitude is, right? That there is choice in that. And when we start looking at free will, kind of, pulling the scope back a little bit and looking at the bigger picture, we can kind of start seeing what are some of the options that we can do. There's so many more things out there now. And so, it actually kind of reminds me, one of the things I always like to ask my guests, speaking of kind of free will and our choices, is that we live differently in our bedroom versus our kitchen or our office. So what's your favorite room in your home and why?
It is my kitchen. And you said immediately I went there because that's the hub. I am a mom of two teenagers. One's out of the house now, but still, but that's where I kind of run my company of my house, if you will, and I can see everything. So talk about like free will, like I can see outside. The living room is right there. But I kind of feel in control there. I like to be in the kitchen, not necessarily cooking, just kind of, I have a little mini computer work stand there. And if I need a cup of tea or I need whatever, like I just can get everywhere in the house. So it's like this, it's the central base. And I like being in there because I can kind of, be observant of everything and everyone going on in the house. And also I like to serve people in my family too. And so I like to be there just, when I can. My daughter will come in and out, right? My husband will come in from his office, and I don't know. I never thought about that. I'm glad you asked that question because that is actually my favorite place to be. I'm going to go there in just a minute. I'm about to go down and, start doing some stuff for dinner here.
Yeah, that's often because, it's interesting. I've been asking that question for years now because where we choose to live in our life and the reasons behind it are that much more powerful, and how we connect with people, what's important to us, it kind of sets that foundation. So I just thought that would be kind of fun to know.
Yeah, well, thanks. Now I know it about myself.
There you go.
Question I didn't even know.
Yes. Well, I know other people are going to want to know about you as well. And how can they best stay in contact with you?
Oh, sure. Well, lots of different ways. If you're on Facebook, great. If you're not, I always say don't start. But if you're on Facebook, I have a page where I post a lot of this information, a lot of research, a lot of science about trauma. It's called Yoga Fit for Warriors. Should be the only one out there. And you'll see a group picture of our first Warriors workshop. We're 10 years now. I'm very excited. Our 10-year anniversary is next year. And so if you're interested in that information, I kind of vet that and I post something every day along it. You can also go to our page, Yoga Fit, and that's where the Warriors program and all the workshops involved in it are. And you can kind of explore. We do offer scholarships for a lot of people for the 2-day PTSD, especially veterans and first responders or people who are working in the mental health field. And we also have, programs for military spouses, my CA, the GI Bill we accept as well. And then they can email me, warrior@yogafit.com. So WARRIOR@yogafit.com. I will respond and I'm always love to chat with people, love to hear people's stories, and, always here to help people, whether they're part of Yoga Fit family or not. Happy to be here of service.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shaye, so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us here today. And as you know, our theme is how people are creating freedom in their life. So for you, how are you creating freedom in your life today?
That's a really good question. And one that's been, of course, as we get older, and I'm in my 50s now, and I love it. And I'm realizing less is more. I think anybody in the 50s, 60s know that already. Like, Shaye, we know, but I'm just discovering the value of more time to contemplate, less busyness. And that gives me a lot more freedom and a lot more creativity. I feel more creative and more engaged in the world. And then when I do agree to do something like teach a class, or I have a private yoga therapy business, whatever it is, I'm doing it with my whole presence. And so less busyness, filling up the schedule, and more space. So then I can just, do the thing I tell my students to do. be in the present moment, breathe, feel, which is that's how you heal, right? You feel to heal. And I need to do that work as well. So I have to, show up for myself in that way. I'm trying to do that more.
I love that. Well, as a woman in her 50s as well, I totally get that. And there's been definitely those years, especially with children, where those were kind of, I dubbed them the crazy years.
Yes, really.
And, when you get past that and your children are older, I actually have grandchildren now. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, you really get clear on what's important and how do you want to spend your time, and practices like yoga that allow you to really get present and be in that space. I just give you that added benefit. So I want to thank you again for your service and for everything that you do to help people become better.
Oh, Diane, thank you. And you too. I really appreciate you asking me to be here. I love your questions. And I am just, excited that we got connected with each other. And again, for all that the joy you bring into the world and your commitment to helping others too. It always is so hopeful for me to know that. Sometimes it feels like we're all alone doing this work. And to know there's other people out in the world just as committed, just as bright. It's just so, again, wonderful. So thank you, Diane. I appreciate you very much.
My pleasure. And to our listeners out there, you as well, for you taking your time to listen in, to see how you can make yourself better, how you can get the tools that you need. If you're finding that you have any trauma in your life or somebody that please share this episode with people. Tools are out there. You don't have to suffer alone. Feel free to ask either myself or Shaye any questions, and we're happy to get you the resources that you need. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.